People don't understand that once government starts telling you what you can and can't do in your church, there is no limit to the power that they will exercise over the church. And that's where we need to be worried.
We went through a season where the government was telling some churches during COVID-19, and as you're viewing this, I don't know when you're viewing this, but your church could still be being told what to do and how to do it. Where do you stand on that? If you were asked to settle the score completely, and all three government branches said, Mike, this decision is in your hands, how do you deal with this unique thing that's been happening from state to state differently? You can go to church, but you can't sing, you have to wear a mask, you have to, so many different rules and regs.
Government at its best should give us an example and should give us information, but we should make decisions unless we're openly hurting someone. The government really doesn't have a right to tell us that we can't assemble. I mean, they just don't have that power. The Constitution is a higher power that tells us that we can. If the government says you cannot assemble and you cannot worship, those are two things that the First Amendment says we can do, and the government can't keep us from doing. Now, the government may say, in the interest of the health of your fellow man and the interest of the health of your community, try to put into motion these things. Wash your hands, sanitize your church, don't have a hug in service. I'm Southern, heck, we hug everybody. Right. But I don't shake hands with people right now, but I still go to church. And if the government thinks we ought to wear a mask, it ought to be a suggestion, not an order. How are they going to do? Put us in prison for not wearing a mask? And then we're going to be in prison with a bunch of people that are wearing masks all the time? I guess what I want to focus on is that when government begins to get into the details of how we live our lives, government at that point is violating the Constitution by dictating things to us that it does not have the power to do. Government can pass laws, and it can tell us we have to drive on the right or the left side of the street, and then we have to drive at a certain speed limit. But even then, we have the consent of the governed that oversees that. So our Constitution, a brilliant document, recognizing our frailties and our sins, but also believing that we as people of liberty have a right to do things that others may choose not to do. And as long as it isn't hurting them, we should be able to exercise that right.
So where do you stand or find yourself on the side of a pastor violating a governor's order and having church regardless of whether they said you could or you couldn't?
I think that's a decision that it's not just the pastor, but it's that congregation makes that decision. And if the people wish to go and the pastor wishes to conduct the service, I think he has a constitutional right to do that. And I'm really concerned, because if the government can tell you that you can't assemble because you might catch a disease, what if they decide that a disease is believing that biblical marriage is holy? And the government decides, no, we don't believe in biblical marriage. We believe in marriage as however you wish to define it. And if you practice this one man, one woman for life stuff, we're going to close you down. People don't understand that once government starts telling you what you can and can't do in your church, there is no limit to the power that they will exercise over the church. And that's where we need to be worried. It's not just to say, okay, so the government wants us to wear a mask or, socially distance. It's the bigger picture and the long game of the government then telling us how many people can belong to our church. I mean, that's one of the things that they are implicitly doing now. You may have a building that seats 5,000 people, but in some states, no one can have a meeting of over 50. So it's not 50 in a room of 300, it's 50 in a room of 5,000, which makes no sense. But the point is, if you let the government dictate to you what your limits of liberty are, they've already won.